Space, the final frontier. This is the Observer's Notebook, the official podcast of the Association of Lunar and Planetary Observers. Its mission to explore the solar system, to seek out new observations and data, to boldly go where no podcast has gone before. And now the host of the Observer's Notebook, Tim Robertson.
Hello and welcome to episode 94 of the Observer's Notebook, the official podcast of the Association of Lunar and Planetary Observers. I'm Tim Robertson, the host of the Observer's Notebook and also the coordinator of the training program within the ALPO. Thank you for downloading and listening. The ALPO collects and analyzes observations of various solar system bodies and associated phenomenon, and publishes detailed reports concerning these bodies in its quarterly publication, the Journal of the Association of Lunar Planetary Observers, also known as a Strolling Astronomer. This podcast depends upon donations from you, our listeners, to keep it alive. If you do enjoy what you hear in the podcast, you can donate to it via Patreon by giving as little as $1 a month. If you feel even more generous, for $5, you receive early access to the podcast before it goes public. For a monthly donation of $10, you receive a copy of the Novice Observer's Handbook. And for $35 a month, you receive producer credits on the podcast. You can help us out by going to www.patreon, that's patreon.com/Observer's Notebook. And if you'd like to join the ALPO, membership begins at only $18 a year. For more information, you can find us at www.alpo-astronomy.org. And you can also find the ALPO on Facebook. Just search for ALPO Astronomy. And yes, this here podcast has its own Facebook page as well. Just search for Observer's Notebook. If you enjoy what you hear in the podcast, please subscribe. That way you'll never miss another episode of the Observer's Notebook. And now, episode 94, with solar observer extraordinaire Tia Ramsmaker. Enjoy. All right, I'd like to welcome everybody back to the Observer's Notebook podcast. We have a special guest today, a solar observer, Theo Ramsmaker. Welcome to the podcast, Theo.
I'm doing great, Tim, and glad to be here.
Great. Now, why don't you give everybody a little background about yourself, where you're from? I believe you're retired, things like that.
Yeah, that's cool. That's one of the best things. I came to this country about 50 years ago, and I come from the Netherlands. I went to upstate New York, worked for a company there in computers for a while, and then eventually went to Atlanta, or the Atlanta area, I should say. And I moved basically to the east side of Atlanta. And I traveled a lot internationally, so I had a pretty busy job. And then when I think it was about 60, I was in my 60s. My kids, they bought me one year, they bought me a telescope for Christmas.
Yeah.
And that really got me back into what I really liked when I was a kid in the Netherlands, looking in the night sky.
Interesting. So you had the interest at a young age, and just work and life got in the way for a while?
Absolutely, yeah. And I was glad it came back.
That's great. So what was your first telescope?
It was a Meade. It was a 4.5-inch Newtonian. And, I really liked it. It was really an eye-opener for me again. Mm-hmm. But, after a few times using it, it wouldn't do the things that I wanted it to do. And so pretty soon after that, I invested into a C20 9.25, and that was an Alt-S, and that really did a lot of good job. So I really like that.
Great. Now, you said you're currently living in the Atlanta area?
I still live in the Atlanta area, yeah.
So you probably have the same thing in common that about 5 or 6 other people I've interviewed for this podcast, the Charlie Elliott Astronomy.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. When I got the telescope, I started looking on the web on if there was a club in the neighborhood, and sure enough, there was the Atlanta Astronomy Club. And then there was a chapter which was the Charlie Elliott chapter of the Atlanta Astronomy Club. And I went, the first opportunity that I got, I went there, and I just really got hooked by what the people were saying and how friendly they were, and they really, welcomed me with open arms, and I really felt well. Then after being a few years there, in 2008, I became the director of Charlie Elliott Astronomy, and was that for 3 years.
That's fantastic. Yeah, everybody I've talked to that's associated with that organization, I'm impressed with. I mean, it seems to be like the pinnacle of astronomy clubs. If you're going to have an astronomy club, this is a good one to model yourself after.
It's really great, and I've been maybe I'm an outsider here on outlier, whatever you want to call it. I do solar primarily, and the other ones they have evolved from when we were doing astronomy back in the around 2010, 2008, 11. A lot of it was focused on the solar system, on planets, planetary imaging, mm-hmm. and Larry Owens, he was a great guy in that, and he taught us all how to do it. So we were all happy for that, and it's really, if anybody lives in this area, come and see us.
That's very good. Now, you mentioned solar observing, and I tell you, every day I see images on my computer of images of the sun that you have taken. Where did this interest in solar observing come from?
Well, I'm kind of a curious person. I'm always wondering why are things in a certain way, and that's what got me in computers. And you always are looking for problems to solve and then to program things and do the things around. And so that is in my blood, I guess, to look for those things that you don't understand and to try to dig into it and find out an answer to it. And with solar, obviously stars and the moon and all that are very interesting. But, the sun is a lot closer. And I think by being retired like I'm 77 now. So, it's not that easy anymore to put your rig up and out in the dark and all that. So during the day, it makes a lot of sense to do that. And that's maybe why I focused on solar.
That's good. You don't have to worry about staying up late, and you can take your nap in the afternoon.
Yeah.
Enjoy life.
And so what I did initially, one of the things that I'm so thankful for is what the country gave me. And I really had a great job, and I made a good living, and I'm pretty happy for that. And I wanted to give something back to the community. So when I was the director of Charlie Elliott in 2008, we really focused very, very heavy on outreach. And we would do outreach events at schools. There was a buddy of mine, Frank Garner, and we teamed up most of the time. And we would go to the schools, many, many times a year. I remember in, I think it was 2014 or 2013, I think I did 68 events. And these are not just events, goodness. These are days at the school. And so you go to the school, they have 5 classes from the morning until afternoon. And so every class you go in, do a presentation, and then you take them outside and let them look at the sun, and you explain exactly what they're seeing, so they get a pretty good understanding of what it is out there.
Yeah, the sun is a great outreach activity for schools because it's easy to see. I mean, it's harder to get the kids back at the school in the evening, but you get them when they're a captive audience during the day. That's great. Yeah,
and the way we did it is, one of the things that I learned pretty quick when I became the director of Charlie Elliott Astronomy was that you really capture the people's attention if you use audiovisual presentations and bring the music in it and things like that, where you can bring a crescendo where it really is very important and things like that. And that's what we did at Charlie Elliott. If you're interested, you can go to YouTube. I still have a bunch of videos out of those days there. My handle at that time was CE Orion fan. So it is CE for Charlie Elliott, CE Orion fan, one word, and you'll find the videos that are there. And so look at the two missions of Columbus. This was when the Columbus module was delivered to the International Space Station, and I tie that back to Columbus when he made his first trip across the Atlantic.
Oh, very cool.
And there's some other things that I really try to make it interesting to the kids to follow. And so that really worked very well, I think.
Yeah, outreach is so important right now. I mean, it's unfortunately we are limited in our current health environment of doing any of that right now, which is really terrible. But
and the other thing, if you are retired and you have the time, I really do encourage everybody to do that. And you go to the schools, you can spend, if you can get a lab hour in the school, that's an hour where you can have their full attention if you want. If you go to the STEM nights at night, I think they're very restrictive because, you're one of many.
Right.
And so they walk by and maybe they're interested, maybe not. If you are in a classroom and you have 30 kids, or they bring two classes in one classroom, you have 60 kids or 40 or something like that. Now, really, you can really make it very interesting for these kids to learn something.
That's great. That's great outreach. Yep. Wonderful. What was there an event or something that sparked your interest in astronomy initially?
Not really. It was obviously I shouldn't say that. Obviously, when I grew up, when I got into computing, that was in the 60s, and so in the 60s we had obviously the space program here in the United States. And the computers that they used in those days, they were pretty much the same what we used in our commercial applications. And so there was a connection there that, what I did at work, other people here across the Atlantic, they were doing that to bring a rocket to the moon,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. So with astronomy, you think it was just the space program that got you interested?
That got me really interested. And then obviously the Boy Scouts in the Netherlands, they're different a little bit than what they are here. Here there is a lot of parents that are involved in that. Over there at the time when I grew up, it was not. It was just a group of kids, and then there was a leader. And so we went a lot camping under the dark skies, and so we you got to know the constellations and things like that. So there was a lot of nurturing in early days also, I believe, that got me kind of hooked on that. And then later on, when I got my telescope, now all of a sudden, hey, now I could do it all, right? And so that's what I try to do.
That's great. Now, is there someone that influenced you the most in astronomy or solar astronomy?
Yeah, no, not in solar astronomy, but when I came to Charlie Elliott, that first meeting, you're new and you walk into a dark room, and it really was a nice setting the way they did it. It was not lit up. It was kind of when you walk into a movie theater, it was kind of dimmed a little bit, and then the projector showed some stars or what, and there was some music playing in the background. Anyway, so you walk in there and you're completely new. You have basically no connection to any of them. Mm-hmm. And so you look around, and all of a sudden I saw this guy sitting in the corner and a big smile on his face, and I thought, oh, wow, go over there, right? That's what I did. That was John Wood.
Okay.
And John Wood, he basically was my mentor in the early days of astronomy. Unfortunately, he passed away in 2010.
I'm sorry.
He was very young at that age, but we were able to name the field for him. So now if you look at the map, you will see John Wood Field. So that's our astronomy field.
That's great. That's great. Now, how did you get involved with the ALPO?
How did I get with the ALPO? Okay, obviously one of the members at Charlie Elliott is Ken Pescetley. Ken obviously is always there making advertising for ALPO, and it was less than a year, and I was an ALPO member, so that came pretty easy.
Yeah, Ken has a way of pulling people into the organization. That's true.
Yeah,
that's
he did, and so that's really how I came into the ALPO.
That's great. Now, with your solar observing, what type of equipment do you use?
Okay, what do I use? This is interesting too. You asked me about people that got me interested in solar. When we were doing the solar, I had a 90 millimeter refractor, and I used a solar filter on it. But Frank Garner, he had a hydrogen alpha scope, and that really interested me very much because now I could see a lot more what was happening on the sun. And so since we were doing so much of it, and I was kind of driving that, one day we had another member in the club, which was Steve Ramsden. And a lot of you people might know him or heard his name. He is the owner and the manager of Charlie Bates' solar astronomy project. And so one day we were doing an outreach event at Charlie Elliott for a group of schools that were there. And at the end of it, all of a sudden, Steve comes up and he says, well, we are going to give the first award for the Charlie Bates project here, and we're going to give it to Theo Ramagers. And so he gave me a calcium K PST and a camera. I think it was a DMK. And that's what Steve has done over the years. He always was very good in that, in getting people's attention and giving the equipment to start with. And so that now I had a calcium K scope, but it's still not what I really wanted to have, right? I wanted to get an hydrogen alpha. So a couple of years later, I invested in a Solar Max 40 and a double stack, and I'm still using that one. So that really is a great working horse.
Yeah. Now you do photography with this equipment, obviously, because I've seen your images in Sky Telescope as well.
Yeah, one of the things that I think that I pay a lot of attention to is publicity. In Charlie Elliott, I hate to go back there all the time, but I think that was such a great time. We used to do a lot of writing articles for the local newspapers. You know, for example, I was a member of the Night Sky Network, and also I was a NASA JPL Solar System Ambassador.
Yeah, so am I.
From 2011 until 2016. And at that time, I was getting at an age where I just felt I couldn't do it all anymore. So that's when I quit that. But we did a lot of articles for local newspapers, and as part of the... you're still there?
Yeah, I'm still here.
Okay, I'm sorry. As part of the Solar System Ambassador Program, I got an invitation to go and see the launch of Curiosity, and that was in 2008. And I went there, and I was so excited, and so I wrote a big article about it, and it got published in 6 newspapers here in the area, and a lot of people liked it. And so other things that we did is, like we did ISS crossings of the sun or the moon.
Okay.
And we published that. And then the one image that actually it is a sequence that I'm very proud of is the ISS crossing of Venus. And we did this at 4:00 in the afternoon, you know, in full daylight. And so we had trouble finding Venus, but once we had Venus, now we had to get the ISS, and but we got it, and so that was a real great thing. And
that's like finding a needle in a haystack, right there. That's tough.
Yeah, and that made it. I'm pretty proud of that. At the Planetary Imaging, the Planetary Society, they put it in the blog, and it got a lot of attention there.
Fantastic, too.
Another thing that I think was. Oh, it slipped my mind now. What was I going to say? Anyway.
That's great. Now, do you do any other observing besides solar?
No, primarily I do solar, but it's not only the observing that I do. the interest that I have is, like I said in the beginning, it is not just, looking at the sun and imaging the sun and making. I care less about the pretty pictures than what's behind it. And so what I did is, when I started back in, I think it was in 2004, 14. It was in 2014, that's when I started on. I started subscribing to NOAA's GEOA report. And that report is being sent out every day, and it gives you all the information that you need to have about the sun. It is a coded report, so it doesn't list exactly, there are that many flares and there are that many sunspots were this big. It is all coded up. But once you understand the code, then it's very simple to start building a database. And I started building a database, and then I started using my database and analyzing what went on. So in 2016, actually it was in the middle of 2016, I wanted to see how the solar flares, or the probability of solar flares, how they stack up compared to the growth of an active region or the growth of the sunspots before that event. And I spent a lot of time on that, and I tried to get it published in the ALPO. The only problem with that was that there were a lot of colors in it, because it was so, you had to show multiple dimensions, and to show that in a two-dimensional area is pretty hard to do if you cannot use colors. And so it took it about 3 years to get that finally out as a monograph. And I'm glad I can published it last month as a monograph on the ALPO site. So that's great.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
This project you came up with your own? You didn't have any?
Yeah, I came up that's what I did myself. In fact, I have continued doing that, and so I have currently because I really liked what I was doing there, I expanded the data back to the beginning of the solar cycle 24. And I had to go to the NOAA site, and boy, I had to dig, and I came to the FTP sites and downloaded and keyed in data for months,
Wow.
But I really wanted to do that. And so I got all that data in my database. And so now I'm looking at trying to basically do a similar thing for the entire cycle 24. And my initial results are, there's so much that it's overwhelming, and I need to sit back again and kind of see what is the right way to do this. But that's what I really like to do, is dig into those questions that are not easily answered.
Yeah. Now you mentioned cycle 24. You're talking solar cycle, solar.
I'm talking about solar cycle 24. Yeah.
And how long is a solar cycle?
Well, that varies. If you go back, I did an article in the JALPO, which came out last month, I think, and you'll see that if you look back, I went back all the way to 1874, I believe, and looked at from solar cycle 12 all the way up to 24, and you'll see it vary. The minimum time that it is about 10 years. And the maximum we have is about a little over 12. And so the rest varies in it. And it's interesting also if you start looking at how, everybody likes the sunspots, right? But if you look at the sunspots, how big they are today, or if I say today, I would have to say, the last few years, they're really tiny compared to what they used to be. If you go back and you look at the data from the mid-century of the last century, in the 40s and 50s, they were huge. We're happy today if we get one that is in the high 2000s. In those days, you had I think I counted 116 or something like that.
Wow.
That were over that size, and then there was one that was 6,200 or something like that. So they were huge in those days, and that is interesting to see the correlation between the sunspots and the length of the solar system. What was the time between two solar cycles where these big areas started to appear? And so if you're interested in that, look at that article, and it gives you a lot of information there.
Okay. Yeah, it's interesting. This solar minimum has been going on quite a while, it seems, in my opinion. And I believe right now it's starting to pick up a little bit. Is that what you're seeing?
Well, I have my own theories about that. And if I look at the minimum that we had between 22 and 23, I see, I measure, one of the measuring sticks that I use is the total active region area for a day. So in other words, if you have multiple active regions, most people, they count how many there are, how many sunspots there are. I don't do that. Well, I mean, I will register the Wolf number, but what I do is I will register the total size of the area, and then I add them up for the day, and then that gives me a yardstick of how the sun is doing today.
Okay.
And I do that for every day, and so then I do it also for the rotation. So I can see how rotations, how they increase in activity and go down in activity. And if I look at, on the other side, if I look at the minimums, I look at the spotless days for a period. And if I compare that to what we are having today to what we had in the minimum 23, 24, there were, for example, we had 5 spotless streaks that were higher than 25 days. So
Really?
we had only 3, okay? If I look at today, we have 8 already. But the big difference between then and now is that of the 5, there were 3 that were really, really big. And the biggest ones that we had in that period was 44 days, 51 days, and 52 days. Whereas today, in the current minimum, we have the maximum that I have, and my numbers are different than what maybe other people have, because I use the Space Weather Prediction Center's numbers rather than the numbers that come from Belgium. So, and then today we have 43 and 36. That's what I got today, compared to the 51, 52, and 44. So I am still looking for some real long streaks to happen. And if I compare that time-wise on the scale of time, then we are doing really long already now, but I haven't seen those long periods yet. And so I'm still hoping and looking for a streak that is going to be longer than the 36 or the 44 that we 43 that we have so far.
Right.
So
wow.
I think it's going to be a little long.
Okay. Now your observations that you do daily, what type of instruments do you use and what wavelengths are you observing in?
Yeah, my standard setup is that like I said, I still have the old PST from Steve Ramsden, and I need to get it. It needs some tender loving care. I need to get it resurfaced. You know, the surfaces are getting corroded. I'm now talking about the optics,
right?
The optic filters, and so I need to send that in and have that done. But that's for the calcium K, and then on the hydrogen alpha, I use the Solar Max 40. It's a small scope, but it's a real workhorse, and I have had no problems with it for about 8 years, at which time the blocking filter started to corrode it also. And so I had that refurbished, and they sent it back, and now it works like new again. And then for white light, I use a Stellar View 90 millimeter refractor, and I have a homemade filter for it. I like the solar filters that they sell, but what I really like is I like a lot of light, and what the solar filters have that you buy in the regular shops is typically 5 micron, and so it takes away a lot of the light so that it is safe for you to look through it with your regular eyes, so right. you don't damage your eyes. What I do is I like to get very short exposure times, because that will take away a lot of the distortion that the higher atmosphere gives us. And so I use a 3.8 micron filter that is not safe for visual viewing, but it does wonders with your imaging, because you get so much light.
Okay. Now, do you use the same? Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
No, and then as a mount, I have a what's it called? A Skywatcher EQ6, and that has served me very well. So that's about the setup that I use.
Okay. Is it permanently mounted? Do you have an observatory, or do you have to lug everything out every day?
Well, when I was living when I started with Charlie Elliott, I lived in Social Circle, which is about 15 miles to the east from here. And I built an observatory there. And then, when I got retired and all that, we wanted to scale down with the house. The house was too big. The guy that bought the house, he said, what about your shed there? And I said, well, I'd like to take that with me. He said, I like it too. I said, well, you buy the house, you keep it. So I left my observatory there, and today I just have 3 spots marked on the concrete. That's where the legs from my tripod go. And if I put it there and I mount my telescope, it is exactly polar aligned. So it at least, let me put it this way, it's enough polar aligned for solar observing.
Yeah, you don't have to worry about long exposures when you're taking pictures of the sun.
That's right. So I deal with half a minute or so, and then that's it, and then I got everything I want.
Wow.
But yeah, that's what I do. And then let me see.
Do you use the same camera on all the scopes, or do you have different cameras?
No, cameras. I started off initially with a Philips, the Toyicam, and that served me well when I started initially with the planetary imaging, and that's what I used in that. Then I bought a DMK, and in fact I had 2 DMKs, and I still have them both. But I ended up with 2 CWO cameras, the ASI 120 mm and the ASI 174 mm. I like the 174, but it has a little bit big of a pixel. It's about 5.4 mic, and but then the 120 is a lot smaller, and so the 120 gives a lot more resolution. But the problem is it creates very fast Newtonian rings, and so you need to make flats and all that stuff to get rid of that, and so it is a lot more work. But those are the cameras that I use: 2 DMKs and 2 Zoos.
Okay, yeah, it's impressive. I mean, I've always tried to get out every night, but you do this every single day. I try. Is it frustrating when you go out? Because I think I've joked with you on Facebook about this, where it looks like the same photograph you've just posted the same day 3 days in a row, because there's nothing on the sun. Is it frustrating to you sometimes when you do the setup and take the images and there's nothing?
No, it's not at all. It's not frustrating at all. And let me tell you why. Okay, and I come back again to the curiosity in me that I always show. Um, Even if the sun it looks like it's a spotless day, and it is not, because if you really start looking and dig into it, there's a lot of activity going on. And you have these little areas on the sun that even in solar minimum show up. And particularly if you have an hydrogen alpha or a calcium K telescope, you see these areas, and some of them are reverse polarized. And so that brings me to another study that I'm doing right now. I started since the beginning, since the middle of the last maximum. I kept looking for reverse polarized areas. Okay, so I started looking for cycle 25 indications. And so I have on the ALPO website, in the solar section, there is a tab somewhere where you can go and look at the images that I made of reverse polarized areas. And it, most people, they say it's the same sun, and to me it's totally different, because you'll see this little area that's reverse polarized or cycle 24 polarized, and so you make out of it what you can, and
Right.
That's what I'm doing. I really milk the cow to the end, right?
Well, no data is actual data. That's the thing. It's you're still coming to a conclusion, and you're looking for the activity, and it's like, the more you look, the more you see.
Yeah, and then you start measuring them. I do all the measuring myself. I use WinJupos for that. I started using WinJupos very, very early on in my imaging areas. And so I log all that stuff, and then I measure the image and see exactly where they are on the solar disk. And then you can start, making statistics and graphs and things like that. And so you can then show where this moves to. And that's what's interesting to me right now. But so even though we're in solar minimum, the sun is as interesting to me now than it is always.
That's good. That's good. Yeah, it's like I say, I see images from you every single day on the internet, and I'm just like, I'm amazed that hey, it's cloudy here, but it's not cloudy in Georgia, so that's good.
Yeah, well, the same here, right? If it's cloudy, I cannot do it, and I like to do my observing in the morning. The afternoon, there's always something else to do, but
right.
If I can, then I make my images. And if there is something interesting if there's an interesting prominence or something like that, then I'll do that too. In fact, I early on have some very interesting prompts. So where I caught some CMEs, leaving the sun, and you make an animation.
Yes.
Yeah, you make an animation from that, and that's cool,
So you're an amateur astronomer, you're not a professional, and you're doing actual science of the sun.
I try to.
Well, it sounds to me like you are. I mean, it's like a research project that you're working on. It's amazing.
Yeah, I'm always interested in learning more, and if I can teach myself, then that's great. If others help in that, that's even better. And if I can inspire other people, then that's even better than that.
That's fantastic too. Wow. Do you have any other information you want to share with our listeners?
Let me quick. No, I talked about my. No, I talked about reverse polarized areas that I'm working on right now. That's about it, I think. Oh, one more thing that is interesting, I think. And when we had the not the last Mercury transit, but the one before, a couple of years back, I think it was in 2016, I believe. I calculated the length of the AU, and that was a real great program from the Astronomical League, where they basically showed you how you could calculate the distance between the sun and the Earth based on making an image from Mercury from where you were, and then also overlaying that to an image that somebody else made somewhere else. And so you could use the distance to calculate the angle, and then based on that you could. And I came pretty close, so that was really cool. I used an image from the Big Bear, and exactly the same time I made my image, and then I downloaded it, overlaid it, and that I got it.
That's great, too. Wow, fantastic. Now, if there's aspiring solar observers out there, how should they get a hold of you?
They can always send me an email. My email address is Theo, that's THEO, at ceastronomy.org. That's CE for Charlie Elliott and astronomy, and that's all one word. So Theo at ceastronomy.org.
And I'll put a link with your email address in the show notes where after people hear this, if they want to chat with you, they'll be able to look you up and talk to you.
That's cool. And then I have my website. They can always go to my website also. I don't only post them on Facebook, but I have my own blog. And that is ceastronomy.org/T-Raumakers.
Raumaker. Okay. And I will add that in addition to the in the show notes as well, too.
Okay.
All right. Well, sir, this has been a lot of fun chatting with you today.
Okay, Tim. Thanks a lot for the opportunity. I appreciate it.
All right. All right, that'll do it for this episode of the Observer's Notebook Podcast. I again want to thank our special guest, solar observer Theo Raumakers, for coming on the podcast today. It was a lot of fun. I hope you enjoyed it. We upload a new episode of the Observer's Notebook on the 1st and 15th of every month. You can subscribe on iTunes. If you do, please rate and review us. I really appreciate it. And you can also listen to us on iHeartRadio, SoundCloud, Spreaker, Google Play, Stitcher, and Amazon Echo. You can help support the podcast by donating to it via Patreon by giving up to $35 a month, where you will receive 1 year's membership to the ALPO and producer credits on the podcast. And with that, I want to thank the producers of this podcast, Steve Siedentop and Michael Moyer, for their generous support of the Observer's Notebook. Thank you very much. The link for Patreon, as well as the link for the ALPO, is in the show notes. If you have questions, comments on the podcast, or just want to chat, you can email me at commentman@commentman.net or on Twitter at ObserversNBPod. Until next time, my hope is you have clear and steady skies and stay healthy out there, everybody. Thank you for listening.